My parents uninvited me from Thanksgiving for embarrassing THEM. I was the only one with a job. The text message. My name is Dana Whitfield. I'm 41 years old, and I run the finance department for a mid-sized logistics company outside Columbus, Ohio. On the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I was sitting in my car in the parking garage at work, eating a granola bar because I hadn't had time for lunch, when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. We've decided it's best if you don't come Thursday. You always make things tense. Everyone will have a better time. I hope you understand. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down on the passenger seat and looked out the windshield at the concrete wall in front of me for a long moment. I didn't cry. I didn't call her. I finished the granola bar because I was still hungry, and because some habits, staying calm, finishing what's in front of you, not making a scene, get built into you so early that they hold even when the ground under you disappears. I want to tell you how I got to that parking garage, because the text wasn't really about Thanksgiving. It was about 11 years of my brother's unpaid loans, my sister's unraveling marriage, a house my parents refinanced twice, and a version of family that only worked if I kept paying for it and never asked why. This is the story of how I found out exactly what embarrassing them meant, and what I did about it, quietly, on paper, with receipts. Before we start, if you're new here, welcome. I tell true stories about family, money, and the slow, quiet way people learn where their own boundaries are. If you've been in a family where you were the reliable one, the one who got the phone call when something went wrong, never the one who got asked how you were doing, I think you'll recognize a lot of this. Stay to the end. I promise there's a moment in this story you'll want to hear, a line I said once, very calmly, at a kitchen table that I still think about. If you like stories like this, subscribe and tell me in the comments, were you ever the reliable one in your family? I read every comment. Now let me take you back. The house on Whitcomb Street. I grew up in a narrow 2-story house on Whitcomb Street in Dayton, Ohio. With green shutters my father repainted every third summer whether they needed it or not. My father, Gary Whitfield, was 58 the year of that Thanksgiving text. He'd spent 30 years as a shift supervisor at an auto parts plant before it closed, and after that he did HVAC repair on the side, though on the side had quietly become mostly. My mother, Carol, was 56, and she'd worked the front desk at a pediatric dental office for as long as I could remember, not because she needed the money, she always said, but because she liked having somewhere to be. There were 3 of us kids. I was the oldest. Then my brother Kevin, 2 years younger, and my sister Renee, 4 years younger than me. Here's the thing about growing up as the oldest in a house like ours. You don't get assigned the role. You just wake up one day and realize you've had it the whole time. When Kevin failed algebra in 10th grade, I was the one who sat with him at the kitchen table 3 nights a week until he passed. When Renee got her heart broken by her first boyfriend, I was the one who drove 40 minutes back from college to sit on her bedroom floor with her. When the dryer broke and my parents didn't have the money to fix it that month, this was 1998, I was 13, I was the one who noticed, because I was the one doing the laundry. My mother used to say, with a kind of proud, sad smile, Dana's just always been the responsible one. She said it like it was a compliment. It took me 25 years to understand it was also a job description nobody had asked me if I wanted. Kevin was the golden one, funny, easy, the kind of kid teachers liked even when he didn't do the homework. Renee was the baby, doted on, protected. I was neither. I was useful. And in our house, useful and loved got tangled together so early that I genuinely didn't know, for most of my life, how to tell them apart. I'll show you exactly how that tangling played out, because it matters for everything that came later: the loans, the house, the will, and eventually that text message in the parking garage. But I want you to see the pattern first, in small moments, the way I actually lived it. Not because I want sympathy. Because I want you to understand why it took me until I was 41 to finally ask the question that changed everything. What have I actually been paying for all these years? What I was actually paying for. Here is a partial list, and I want to be precise, because precision is going to matter a great deal later in this story. In 2009, when I was 24 and 2 years into my first accounting job, Kevin's car got repossessed. I paid $2,400 to get it back, because my mother called crying and said he'd lose his job at the warehouse without a car, and you know your brother, he just needs one more chance. I didn't get that money back. I didn't ask for it back. I told myself it was a gift. In 2012, Renee's wedding cost $18,000. My parents paid $6,000. I paid $4,000 because Renee cried on the phone that she didn't want a sad, small wedding, and I was, by then, making decent money and single, and it felt petty to say no. In 2015, my parents refinanced the house on Whitcomb Street to cover Kevin's divorce lawyer and back child support. I didn't pay for that one directly, but I co-signed a $9,000 personal loan for my father that same year, just to bridge the gap until the refinance closes. I still have the loan documents. I paid that loan off myself over 4 years, in full, because my father's HVAC business had a slow winter and then another slow winter after that. In 2019, I paid for my mother's hip surgery copays, about $3,100, because insurance is a nightmare and your father's business account is tight right now. By my calculation, and I did calculate it eventually on a spreadsheet I'll tell you about later. Between 2009 and the year of that Thanksgiving text, I had given my family, in cash, cosign loans, and direct payments, just over $61,000. I want to be clear about something. I didn't resent giving any single one of those amounts at the time. Each one, alone, felt like something a decent daughter does. A decent sister does. It was only years later, laid end to end on a piece of paper, that I saw the shape of it, not a series of kind gestures, but a system. A system where I was the infrastructure holding up a family that never once asked me how I was doing, and where the story everyone told about me was that I was difficult and made things tense, while the story everyone told about Kevin was that he was going through a rough patch. A phrase that somehow lasted 11 years. I married my husband, Marcus, in 2016. He's a structural engineer, 43 now, steady and quiet in a way that balanced something in me I didn't know needed balancing. Marcus was the first person who ever looked at one of these requests. It was the hip surgery copay, and said, gently, not accusingly, "Dana, can I ask you something? Does anyone in your family ever ask you if you're okay?" I didn't have an answer for him. I remember that specifically because it was the first time the question had ever been asked out loud in my presence, and I sat with my mouth slightly open for a few seconds before I said, "That's not really how our family works." He didn't push it. Marcus never pushed. But he remembered that conversation, and so did I, and it planted something that took years to grow. The group chat. I want to show you the family group chat, because it tells you more about the dynamics than I could explain in paragraphs. It was called Whitfield Fam, and it had 5 people in it. Me, Kevin, Renee, my mother, and my father, who mostly used it to send weather warnings and, once memorably, a photo of a raccoon on the back porch with the caption, "Guess WHO." Here's a real exchange from March of the year in question, which I'm reconstructing from actual screenshots I kept. And yes, I want you to notice that I kept them, because that habit is going to matter. Kevin, hey, does anyone have $400 I can borrow till Friday? Landlord thing. Mom, Dana, can you help him out me? I sent Kevin $600 in January for the exact same thing. Has that been paid back? Mom, Dana, it's not a competition. He's your brother. Kevin, it's not a big deal, I'll pay you back this time for real me. Okay, I can do $200. Mom, neutral face. That little frowning emoji sat there in the chat for the rest of the day, doing more emotional work than an entire paragraph of guilt could have done. Nobody said anything else. Nobody needed to. I sent the $200 within the hour, and I remember feeling something I couldn't quite name, not guilt exactly, and not anger exactly, but a kind of low, steady exhaustion, the feeling of a muscle that has been clenched for so long it's forgotten what it feels like to relax. I never saw the $200 again either. There's a version of this story where I tell you I saw all of this clearly back then and simply chose, out of love, to keep giving. That would be a nicer story. It isn't true. The truth is that I didn't fully see the pattern until much later, because I was too close to it, the way you can't see the whole shape of a room you've lived in your entire life. I saw individual moments. I didn't see the architecture. Renee saw some of it. She told me once quietly in a coffee shop, "You know they treat you different, right?" But even Renee, for reasons that will become clear, had her own complicated stake in keeping the system running. That coffee shop conversation is where I want to slow down next, because it's the first time anyone in my family said the quiet thing out loud. Renee's coffee shop confession. It was October, 13 months before the Thanksgiving text, and Renee asked me to meet her at a coffee shop called Grounded, off Route 4, on a Tuesday morning when she should have been at work. She was 37 then, a dental hygienist, married to a man named Todd who sold commercial insurance and had a habit of buying things, a boat, a truck, a lake house down payment, right when their savings account looked healthiest. Renee looked tired in a way makeup wasn't covering. She stirred her coffee for a long time before she said anything. "Todd and I are behind on the mortgage," she said finally. "Like, actually behind 2 months." I asked her how much, because that's always been my first question, the accountant in me reaching for the number before the feeling. 14,000 if you count the late fees and what we need to catch up plus next month. She looked up at me. "I haven't told Mom and Dad." "Why are you telling me?" She was quiet for a second. "Because you always figure it out, and because," she stopped, started again. "Dana, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not be weird about it." "Okay." When Dad refinanced the house back in 2015, it wasn't just for Kevin's divorce. Some of it went to help Todd and me buy the lake property, like $22,000 of it. I sat there and I want to describe exactly what happened in my body, because it's the kind of detail I think matters more than saying, I was shocked. My hands went still around my coffee cup. My hearing seemed to narrow, like the espresso machine, and the music got quieter. I felt something drop in my stomach, not sharply, but slowly, the way a stone sinks in still water. "I didn't know that," I said. "I know, nobody was supposed to know. Mom said it would stir things up if everyone knew who got what." Renee's eyes were wet now. "I've felt sick about it for years, and now Todd wants to ask them for help again, and I don't know how to say no to him, and I don't know how to ask them without you finding out, and I'm so tired of all of us lying to each other about money." I asked her the question that, looking back, was the real beginning of everything that followed. "Renee, has anyone in this family ever put in writing what they've given each of us? Or is it all just talked about in private, one conversation at a time, so nobody can add it up?" She looked at me like I'd asked her something in another language. "Why would anyone write it down?" "Because if nobody writes it down," I said, "then nobody can ever be held to it. And I think that might be exactly why nobody has." I didn't say it angrily. I said it the way you'd point out a structural problem in a house. "This beam is cracked. This is why the door doesn't close right." Renee didn't argue with me. She just looked scared, the way people look when a floor they've been standing on their whole lives is described to them as unsound for the first time. I gave her $1,500 that day, from my own account, no strings, and told her that was the last unwritten, undocumented money she'd ever get from me, not as a punishment, but because I'd started, quietly, to feel something shift in myself. I didn't know yet what it would become. I just knew that, "I need to tell you something and you can't be weird about it," had become the most honest sentence anyone in my family had said to me in years, and I didn't want to go back to the silence after it. That night, I opened a blank spreadsheet on my laptop. I titled the first tab, "Family, Reference Only." I told myself it was just for my own peace of mind. I didn't tell Marcus about it for another 2 months. The spreadsheet. I want to pause the story here and tell you directly what building that spreadsheet was like, because it wasn't a single dramatic act. It was small, over months. I'd remember a number, the $2,400 for Kevin's car, and add a line. I'd find an old bank statement in a drawer and add a line. I texted Renee once carefully, "Hey, random, but do you remember roughly what year the lake property closed?" And she told me, not realizing what I was building. By April, 7 months before Thanksgiving, the spreadsheet had 4 tabs: Kevin, Renee, parents, and a 4th tab I labeled, a little grimly, "Me," which was empty except for a single line, "Received. $0 documented since 2009. I want to be honest about the emotional layer here, because this isn't a story about a woman who coldly built a legal case against her own family. Every time I added a line, I felt something complicated, a flicker of anger, yes, but underneath that, grief. grief for a version of being someone's daughter that didn't come with a running invoice. I'd sit at my kitchen table at night, Marcus already asleep, and I'd stare at the numbers and think, I don't actually want the money back. I want someone to say they saw what this cost me. That's an important distinction because it's the difference between what this story eventually became and what it could have become. I was never building toward a lawsuit. I was building toward the truth. Those aren't the same thing, and by the end, you'll see why that mattered. I finished the spreadsheet, or as finished as it would ever get before the confrontation, on November 9th, 16 days before Thanksgiving. The total, adjusted for the money that had actually been repaid, very little of it had, sat at $61,340. I closed the laptop that night and didn't open the spreadsheet again until I needed it. The job everyone forgot I had. There's a detail in the title of this story I haven't fully explained yet, that I was the only one with a job. And I want to walk you through what that actually meant inside my family, because it's not simply a brag about employment status. It's about how invisible, steady, unglamorous competence can become inside a family that's used to treating you as a utility rather than a person. By that November, here is where everyone stood. I was director of finance at a logistics company, a role I'd worked 12 years to earn, managing a team of 11. Marcus was a structural engineer at a firm doing well enough that we just started talking, cautiously, about a second home renovation. We had 2 kids, Owen, 8, and Lily, 5, and a mortgage we paid on time every month, which I mention only because it will matter later that this was never in question. Kevin, meanwhile, was 40 years old and between jobs for the 3rd time in 4 years, currently doing rideshare driving to keep some money coming in while I figure out my next move. He was still paying child support, inconsistently, for 2 kids from his first marriage, and he'd started dating a woman named Brittany, who, as far as I could tell, had strong opinions about our family's group chat and no hesitation about sharing them. Renee and Todd had, in fact, taken more money from my parents that October, on top of the $22,000 lake house contribution years earlier, another $8,000, just to get through the winter, which I only knew about because Renee, true to her promise of honesty with me, told me herself, apologetically, over the phone. My parents, at 58 and 56, had refinanced their house twice, had almost no retirement savings beyond my father's modest pension from the plant, and had, as I would later confirm through documents I'll describe in detail, quietly begun drawing down a small inheritance fund my grandmother had left specifically for the grandchildren's education, to cover some of Kevin and Renee's gaps. Here is the strange, quiet cruelty of it. At every family gathering, every Christmas, every birthday, I was the one who got asked, gently, almost as an aside, "So how's work going?" A polite, minor question, the kind you'd ask a coworker's spouse. Kevin's job troubles got 20 minutes of concerned family discussion. Renee's marriage got its own dedicated phone calls. My stability, the thing that had actually made most of their stability possible, got treated as background noise. Not because anyone was being deliberately cruel, because stability doesn't generate urgency, and our family had organized itself, for decades, around whoever generated the most urgency. I didn't fully understand how resentful that quiet erasure had made me until the week of the text message, when my mother said something on the phone that I want to tell you about now, because it's the moment that made the eventual uninvitation almost predictable, in hindsight. You always make things tense. It was the Sunday before Thanksgiving. My mother called to finalize plans, who was bringing what time to arrive, and near the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, she said, "Oh, and Dana, I need you to not bring up the loan thing with your father this year. He's stressed enough." I hadn't brought up the loan thing in months. I asked her what she meant. "You know, money, just let's keep Thanksgiving light. Kevin's bringing Brittany, and I want everyone to have a nice time." I said evenly, "Mom, I haven't mentioned money to Dad since Easter. I'm not planning to bring it up." "Well, good, because last time you made everyone uncomfortable." Last time was Easter, and what had actually happened at Easter was this. My father had mentioned, cheerfully in front of everyone, that he was thinking about co-signing a truck loan for Kevin, and I had said quietly, not sharply, "Dad, can we talk about that privately after dinner instead of deciding it right now at the table? That was the entire incident. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't said anything about the $9,000 loan I was still, at that time, 3 years into paying off myself. I had simply asked for a private conversation instead of a public decision made in front of Kevin's new girlfriend. That, in my family, had apparently been recorded as Dana made everyone uncomfortable. I didn't argue with my mother on the phone. I said, "Okay, Mom, I'll see you Thursday," and I hung up, and I sat in my car in the driveway for a minute, a habit, apparently, sitting in cars processing things my family had said before going inside. 2 days later came the text. "We've decided it's best if you don't come Thursday." I want you to notice the word we. Not I, not your father and I talked about it. We've decided. I would later learn exactly who we included, and it wasn't just my parents. But that discovery came later, and I want to walk you through it the way I actually lived it, chapter by chapter, discovery by discovery, because the order in which I learned things is part of what makes this story what it is. Calling Renee. I called Renee that night, after Owen and Lily were in bed, sitting on the back porch with a coat over my pajamas because Marcus had the TV on and I wanted quiet. "Did you know?" I asked her, no preamble. There was a pause just long enough to answer the question before she said anything. "Dana, Renee, did you know? Mom called me Sunday night. She said you'd been difficult at Easter and that this year they wanted Thanksgiving to be just easy. She asked if I thought it was a good idea to not have you there. I said I didn't think that was fair. But you didn't tell me. I didn't think they'd actually do it. I thought it was Mom venting. I'm sorry, Dana, I should have called you." I believed her mostly. Renee has never been a strong liar. Guilt sits on her voice like a visible weight. But I also noted, and I want to be honest that I noted it, clinically, the accountant part of my brain running even while the daughter part of me sat on a cold porch feeling something crack open in her chest, that Renee had known for 2 days and hadn't warned me. That her instinct, even now, even after the coffee shop, even after everything, was to stay quiet and hope. It resolved itself rather than to stand between me and our parents. "Who else knew?" I asked. "I don't know. I think Mom talked to Kevin." "Kevin agreed to this." Another pause. "I don't know what he said, Dana. You should ask him." I didn't call Kevin that night. I sat on the porch a while longer, and then I went inside, and Marcus took one look at my face and turned off the TV. "What happened?" he said, not a question, a door opening. I told him. All of it, the text, the call with Renee, Easter, the years of loans, the lake house money, the spreadsheet I'd built and hadn't told him about. I talked for almost an hour. Marcus didn't interrupt once except near the end when I described the $61,340 total, and he said, quietly, "Dana, that's not a family being generous with each other. That's you funding a household you're not even allowed to sit at the table of." I hadn't put it in those words to myself yet. Hearing him say it, I felt the strange relief of a diagnosis, the specific comfort of finally having language for a pain you'd only felt as vague and shapeless before. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm not going to yell at anyone. I'm not going to beg to be let back into a dinner. I want to actually understand what happened here before I decide anything." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then let's figure out what happened." That sentence, "let's figure out what happened," became the quiet engine of the next several weeks. What I started looking for. I'm going to walk you through the investigation in some detail because I think the how matters as much as the what. I wasn't hacking into anyone's accounts. I wasn't hiring a private investigator. What I did was far simpler and, in a strange way, far more damning. I started asking direct, calm, specific questions of the people in my family who had already shown me, at the coffee shop, at Easter, on the porch that night, that they weren't quite comfortable lying to my face when asked plainly. The first thing I did, the Wednesday morning before Thanksgiving, the day before the dinner I would not be attending, was call my Aunt Pam, my mother's younger sister, who lived 2 hours away and had always liked me, in the slightly guilty way that childless aunts sometimes favor the sensible niece. "Did Mom tell you I'm not coming tomorrow?" I asked her. "She mentioned it," Aunt Pam said carefully. "Dana, honey, I don't want to get in the middle of." "I'm not asking you to get in the middle. I just want to know one thing. Did she tell you why? A long exhale on the other end of the line. She said you and your father had a big fight about money at Easter and that things had been tense ever since, and that she thought everyone needed a break from the tension. That's really all she told me. There wasn't a fight, I said. I asked to talk about a loan privately instead of at the table. That's the entire incident. I believe you, Aunt Pam said, and something in her voice, tired, a little sad, told me she meant it, and also that this wasn't the first time she'd quietly believed me over my mother's version of events without ever saying so out loud. Dana, can I tell you something? Off the record. Please. Your mother called me back in September, asking if I could lend her and your father some money. $11,000. She said it was to help even things out with what they'd need to give Kevin for a truck and Renee for the winter, since, and this is a direct quote, honey, since Dana doesn't need the same kind of help the others do. I sat with that sentence for a moment. Dana doesn't need the same kind of help the others do. It was true, in the narrowest sense, I didn't need financial help. But the sentence did something else, something I don't think my mother even noticed doing. It quietly reclassified me from daughter into resource. The others needed help. I simply didn't need any, which apparently made me a convenient place to not spend concern, not a person whose stability might also deserve a phone call asking how I was doing. Did you lend it to her? I asked. 4,000, I didn't have the rest. Aunt Pam's voice tightened. Dana, I love your mother, but I've watched this happen for 15 years. You're the only one of the three of you who never asks for anything, and somehow that's turned into you being the only one who never gets anything either. I'm sorry. I should have said something to you a long time ago. I thanked her, and I meant it, and after we hung up I added a new line to my spreadsheet, not a dollar figure this time, but a note, Sept, Mom borrowed $4,000 from Aunt Pam, said Dana doesn't need help like the others. Confirmed by Pam, verbal. I was learning something important about how to build a case, even though I still wasn't fully sure yet that I was building a case at all. I was learning that people who have watched an injustice happen quietly for years and never said anything are often desperate for someone to finally ask them the direct question. Aunt Pam had been carrying that sentence, Dana doesn't need the same kind of help, for 2 months, waiting, without knowing it, for someone to ask her to set it down. Thanksgiving without me. I want to tell you what my actual Thanksgiving looked like, because it wasn't a montage of quiet suffering. It was, in its way, a good day, and I think that surprised me more than anything else that week. Marcus, the kids, and I drove 40 minutes to his parents' house instead. His mother, Diane, a retired school teacher, had been horrified when Marcus told her what happened and had insisted, immediately, warmly. Then you're coming here, obviously, all of you. I sat at a table where nobody asked me to referee a lone discussion, where Owen and Lily ran around with Marcus's brother's kids, where the only tension in the room was a mild disagreement about whether the stuffing needed more sage. Diane pulled me aside while we were doing dishes. Marcus told me a little of it, she said, not prying, just offering the door if I wanted to walk through it. I just want you to know, whatever's going on over there, you have a place at this table every year, tension or no tension. Some families call it keeping the peace, when really what they mean is keeping quiet. I didn't cry at Diane's sink, but it was close. I said thank you, and I meant it more than she probably knew. Back at Whitcomb Street, I would later learn, piecing it together from Renee's later account, and eventually from the group chat itself, that the actual Thanksgiving dinner had not, in fact, been easy or light as my mother had hoped. Kevin's girlfriend Brittany had asked, apparently within the first 20 minutes, so where's the sister who does the finance thing? I wanted to ask her about refinancing our apartment lease, not knowing she was stepping directly into the exact absence the day had been built around. My mother had reportedly given a vague answer about everyone needing some space this year, and the table had gone quiet in the particular way tables go quiet when everyone at it knows a lie is being told and has silently agreed not to examine it. My father, according to Renee, hadn't said much at all. Renee described him staring at his plate for a long stretch during the meal, and later, alone in the kitchen with her, saying, and I want to give you this exactly as Renee reported it to me, because I think it matters. This doesn't feel as good as I thought it would. I didn't know what to do with that sentence when Renee first told me. I still think about it. It suggested something I hadn't fully considered, that my father might not have been the architect of the uninvitation so much as someone who'd gone along with it, the way he'd gone along with so many things in that house for 30 years and had discovered, one plate of turkey too late, that going along with it didn't feel like the relief he'd expected. The group chat again. 2 days after Thanksgiving, the Whitfield fam group chat lit up again, and this time I was still in it. Nobody had removed me, which I noted with a kind of bleak irony. I'd been uninvited from the meal, but not from the chat about the meal. Mom, thank you all for a lovely Thanksgiving. So nice to have an easy, relaxed day for once. Kevin, yeah, it was good to just chill honestly, Renee. No response. I sat looking at that message, so nice to have an easy, relaxed day for once, for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt reading it, because I think the honest feeling is more useful to you than a cleaned-up version. I didn't feel rage. I felt something colder and clearer than rage. A kind of settling, the way sediment settles in water that's finally been left still long enough. I understood, reading that message, that my mother believed what she'd written. In her mind, my presence really had been the source of tension, and my absence really had produced easy and relaxed. She wasn't performing for an audience. She meant it. That's the moment I understood something crucial about this whole situation, something I'll ask you to hold on to for the rest of the story. My mother didn't uninvite me because she thought I was a bad person. She uninvited me because, somewhere over the past decade, our family's story about itself had quietly rewritten who the problem was. The person who occasionally, gently, asked for boundaries or documentation or private conversations about money had become the tense one. The people who required tens of thousands of dollars in undocumented bailouts, one crisis at a time, had become the ones going through a rough patch. Chaos had been reclassified as normal. Calm had been reclassified as disruption. I didn't respond to the group chat. I put my phone down and I went and found Marcus, who was building a Lego set on the living room floor with Owen, and I said, I think I need to actually talk to a lawyer. Not to sue anyone. I need to understand the loan documents, the house refinance, and what's actually happening with my grandmother's education fund. Marcus looked up at me for a second, then nodded, like he'd been waiting for me to arrive at exactly that sentence. I know someone, he said. Structural engineers end up knowing a lot of real estate attorneys. Let me make a call tomorrow. Sandra Kupchak, attorney at law. Her office was on the second floor of a converted house near downtown Dayton, with a waiting room that smelled like coffee and old carpet, and a receptionist named Doris, who had clearly worked there since the Clinton administration. Sandra Kupchak herself was around 60, gray-haired, wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and had the unhurried, unimpressed manner of someone who had heard every possible variation of family financial dysfunction and was rarely surprised anymore. I brought the spreadsheet, printed, along with copies of the $9,000 personal loan I'd co-signed and paid off, bank statements showing the wedding and hip surgery payments, and, thanks to a call to my grandmother's old bank that I'll describe in a moment, a partial statement on the education trust fund. Sandra read through everything for about 15 minutes without saying much, occasionally making a small mark with a pencil. Finally, she took off her glasses and looked at me. Okay, she said. First, the good news, if you want to call it that. None of what you're describing is illegal on its face. Parents can give their money to whichever adult children they want in whatever amounts for whatever reasons. There's no law requiring fairness in a family. I know, I said. I'm not here to sue my parents. I didn't think you were. You don't have the face of someone who wants to sue her parents. You have the face of someone who wants 3 specific pieces of paper. She held up 3 fingers. 1, exactly what happened to your grandmother's education trust, since that one's not just a family gift, that's a fiduciary matter if your father is trustee, which I'm guessing he is. He is. 2, exactly what your cosign loan looked like on paper, because I want to make sure you're fully released from it now that it's paid and not still exposed to anything. Already paid off, I have the release letter. Good. 3, she paused and looked at me with something that might have been the closest thing to warmth I'd see from her that day. 3, and this is the one that actually matters. You want a piece of paper, could be a letter, could be a spreadsheet, could be your own written account, that simply lays out, factually, without editorializing, exactly what has happened over the past 15 years. Not for a courtroom, for a kitchen table. Because right now, your family has a story about who you are, and it's wrong, and stories like that don't get corrected by tears or accusations. They get corrected by dates and numbers, laid out so plainly that nobody in the room can argue with them. I felt something in my chest loosen slightly, hearing someone with no emotional stake in my family describe, in about 30 seconds, exactly what I'd been slowly building for the past 2 months without fully admitting to myself what it was for. The trust, Sandra continued, is the one piece with real teeth if there's been misuse. Your grandmother's trust documents, do you have those? I didn't, not the full documents, but I knew where to get them. The education trust. My grandmother, Eleanor Whitfield, had died in 2011 when I was 26, leaving a modest trust, just under $40,000 at the time, explicitly designated for the education of my grandchildren, naming my father as trustee. At the time, only I was old enough to have used it meaningfully. I'd already finished my accounting degree with student loans I was still paying off, so the money sat, largely untouched, meant eventually for Owen, Lily, and whatever children Kevin and Renee might eventually have. I called the trust's bank, First Miami Savings, a small regional bank that mercifully still had responsive humans answering the phone, and, as a beneficiary named in the trust documents, requested a statement history. It took 11 days and one follow-up call, but it came. The trust, which should have held roughly $40,000 plus modest growth over 13 years, call it $46,000 conservatively, held $11,200. I want to describe what it felt like to see that number, because it was different from every other number in this story. The $61,340 I'd calculated for my own contributions had made me feel exhausted and unseen. This number made me feel something closer to cold. This wasn't money I'd given away, deciding for myself, imperfectly, how generous to be with people I loved. This was money that belonged, specifically, by my grandmother's written wish, to children, including my own children, Owen and Lily, that had been quietly spent down by my father, as trustee, on things that were not their education. I called Sandra the next morning and read her the number. She was quiet for a second. "Okay," she said. "Now we need the withdrawal history, not just the balance, because there's a real difference between your father made 3 loans from the trust to himself with a plan to repay it, and your father has been treating this account as a slush fund for 11 years. One of those is a bad decision made under pressure. The other is something a court would take seriously if a beneficiary, say, your daughter Lily, when she's older, or you on her behalf now, ever wanted to pursue it." "I don't want to take my father to court," I said. "I know," Sandra said, not unkindly. "But you should still get the withdrawal history, not because you're going to use it in court, because you deserve to actually know what happened to your own daughter's college money instead of being lied to about it for the rest of your life." She was right, and I got the history within another 2 weeks, 9 separate withdrawals between 2015 and the previous spring, ranging from $1,800 to $6,000 each, with memo lines that ranged from vague, family need, to almost defiantly honest. Lake Property Assist, dated exactly the month Renee had told me the $22,000 had gone through, though the trust withdrawal itself was only $6,000 of that $22,000. Meaning the rest had come from the house refinance directly, a second source I hadn't even fully accounted for yet. I sat with the printed statement at my kitchen table one evening in early December, Owen and Lily asleep upstairs, and I thought about the fact that my daughter's education fund had a line item labeled, essentially, helped pay for your aunt's lake house. And I felt, for the first time in this entire process, genuinely furious, not the cold, settling anger from the group chat message, but a hot, immediate, protective fury, the kind that comes from watching someone take something from your child. Marcus found me at the table and read the statement over my shoulder in silence. "I'm not going to yell at anyone," I said before he could ask. "I already told you that, I meant it." "I know," he said, "but you're allowed to be furious while you don't yell. Those aren't the same thing." I hadn't thought about it that way before, and it turned out to be one of the more useful sentences anyone said to me during the entire ordeal. The voicemail. I need to tell you about one more discovery before we get to what I actually decided to do, because it's the piece that finally, completely, changed how I understood the Thanksgiving text message, the "we've decided," and who exactly we had been. In mid-December, Kevin called me out of nowhere, sounding strange, a little rehearsed, like he'd practiced what he was going to say. He asked if we could get coffee. I said yes, mostly out of curiosity. We met at a diner near his apartment. He looked tired, older than 40, with the specific fatigue of someone whose life keeps almost working out and never quite does. He didn't apologize right away. He talked about Brittany, about a new rideshare bonus structure, about a job interview he had coming up. I let him talk, because I'd learned over the years that Kevin eventually gets to the point if you don't rush him, though it sometimes takes 45 minutes of runway first. Eventually, he said, "Look, I feel bad about Thanksgiving." "Okay," I said neutrally. "Mom called me before she sent you that text, asked what I thought." He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, not looking at me. "I told her I didn't think it was a great idea, but I didn't fight her on it, Dana. I should have, I'm sorry." "What exactly did she say to you, on that call?" Kevin hesitated, and then, in a gesture that genuinely surprised me, he pulled out his phone. "She left me a voicemail after the call, actually, following up on something. I never deleted it. I don't know why. Honestly, I think some part of me knew I'd want proof someday that I didn't come up with this." He played it for me, right there in the diner, holding the phone between us. My mother's voice, tired, a little sharp. "Kevin, it's Mom. Look, I talked to your father and we both think it's better if Dana doesn't come Thursday. She's going to make everyone tense with the money stuff, especially with Brittany there for the first time, and honestly, she doesn't exactly need the family the way the rest of us do. She's got Marcus. She's got her own thing going." Renee agreed it's probably easier this year too. "So it's settled. I'm going to text her tonight. Just wanted you to know before she does, in case she says anything to you." I sat very still in that diner booth. Several things landed at once, and I want to name each one because each one mattered. First, Renee agreed it's probably easier this year too. Renee, who had told me on the phone that she didn't think it was fair, had, according to my mother, at least agreed. I would need to find out which version was true. Second, she doesn't exactly need the family the way the rest of us do. There it was again, nearly word for word what Aunt Pam had reported months earlier. This wasn't a one-time comment my mother had made in a moment of frustration. It was a fixed belief, repeated across multiple conversations, months apart, to different people. Dana doesn't need us. And from that belief, apparently, followed a kind of permission. If I didn't need them, then I could be set aside without real cost, the way you might not worry about disappointing someone who doesn't really need the thing you're withholding. Third, and this is the one that actually made my eyes sting, sitting in that vinyl booth. Nowhere in that voicemail, not once, did either of my parents raise an actual grievance about anything I had done. Not Easter. Not the loan thing. The entire justification collapsed, in my mother's own private words to my brother, into a belief about my self-sufficiency, dressed up afterward, for my benefit, as a complaint about my behavior. I hadn't been uninvited because I made things tense. I'd been uninvited because I was, in my mother's calculation, the one person in the family who could absorb the cost of being pushed aside without visibly breaking. "Can you send that to me?" I asked Kevin, my voice steadier than I expected. He looked uncertain for the first time. "Dana, I don't want to start a war." "I don't either," I said, and I meant it. "I want to understand what actually happened. That's different from a war." He sent it to me. I thanked him, and I meant that too. It had cost him something, I think, to keep that voicemail and then to play it for me. A small, real act of honesty inside a family that had made honesty into something rare and slightly dangerous. Before I left the diner, I asked him one more thing. "Kevin, can I ask you something? And I want you to actually think about it before you answer." "Sure." "Do you think Mom and Dad love you and Renee differently than they love me? Not more or less. Differently." He was quiet for a long moment, turning the coffee cup again. "I think," he said finally, "they love us like we're still kids who need saving. And I think they love you like I don't know, like you're the adult in the room, which sounds like a compliment, but I don't think it feels like one from where you're sitting. It was, without question, the most emotionally perceptive thing my brother had ever said to me in 40 years. I told him so. He laughed, a short, surprised sound, and said, "Don't tell Mom. She thinks I don't notice anything." The decision. I want to slow all the way down here, because this is the part of the story that matters most, more than the spreadsheet, more than the trust documents, more than the voicemail. This is where I actually decided what to do with everything I'd found. I talked to 3 people in the 2 weeks after the diner conversation with Kevin, and I want to tell you honestly what each conversation gave me. Because none of them told me what to do. They each gave me one piece of the frame I eventually built my own decision inside of. The first was my therapist, a calm, unhurried woman named Dr. Acaffer I'd been seeing on and off for about 4 years, mostly for garden variety work stress, who I called specifically because of this. I told her everything, the trust, the voicemail, the 15 years of loans. She listened for a long time before she said anything. "I want to ask you a question," she said eventually, "and I want you to notice your first, unfiltered answer before you talk yourself into a better one. What do you actually want to happen?" My first, unfiltered answer surprised me. I want them to say, out loud, that they saw what this cost me. I don't actually want the money back. I want to stop being invisible in my own family. "That's a want you can act toward," Dr. Acaffer said. "It's not a want you can force someone else to give you, though. You can create the conditions for it. You can lay out the truth clearly, calmly, undeniably. But whether they actually see you in the end is theirs to do, not yours. I think you already know that. I think the real question is, can you do the laying out part and be at peace with it, even if they never get to the seeing part?" I sat with that question for days. The second conversation was with Sandra, the attorney, purely practical. What would it actually take, on paper, to formally step back, to stop being an implicit financial backstop for a family that had, apparently, stopped considering my feelings a relevant input into their decisions? Sandra helped me draft 2 things: a letter, formal but not hostile, informing my father as trustee that I was formally requesting, on behalf of my minor children as named beneficiaries, a full accounting of the education trust going forward, with statements sent to me annually, and a separate, simple document revoking my status as co-signer or guarantor on any future family loans, effective immediately, which mostly existed to close a door rather than to punish anyone. Since, as Sandra pointed out, the fact that you've had to formally revoke an assumption that was never actually agreed to in the first place tells you something about how that assumption got made. The third conversation was the hardest, and it was with Marcus, not because he disagreed with anything, but because he asked me the one question that made me actually cry for the first time in this whole process. "Dana," he said, one night in bed, the lights already off, "whatever you decide to do, are you doing it to change them, or to finally be honest with yourself?" I cried for a while before I could answer him, quietly, the way I do most things. I think for a long time I thought if I just gave enough, eventually they'd see me the way they see Kevin and Renee, like someone who needs to be worried about, checked on, protected. And I think what I actually need to accept is that they might never do that. And I need to stop organizing my whole life around waiting for it. Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. Then he reached over in the dark and found my hand. "Then do the honest thing," he said, "not the thing that makes them change, the thing that lets you finally put it down." That sentence, "the thing that lets you finally put it down," became, in a sense, my actual thesis for what I decided to do next. Not confrontation as a weapon. Confrontation as the last honest act in a system built almost entirely on things left unsaid. Building the folder. Over the next 3 weeks, through the rest of December, past Christmas, which I spent, again, with Marcus's family, this time by my own clear choice rather than anyone's decree, I built what I eventually just called, in my own head, the folder. It wasn't dramatic. It was, appropriately for who I am, an accounting exercise. I organized. The full spreadsheet, 15 years, 3 tabs plus my own, $61,340 in documented contributions, dates and amounts sourced from bank statements, texts, and, where I couldn't find a document, careful notes on the conversation where the number had been confirmed verbally, clearly marked as such. The trust statement and 9 withdrawals, $28,800 total pulled from an account meant for my children's education, spanning 11 years, memo lines included. The voicemail transcript, which I had typed out word for word, time-stamped, alongside Kevin's written confirmation, via text, that he was comfortable with me having and using it, as long as nobody thinks I'm trying to start something. I just don't want to lie about it anymore either. A short, plainly worded cover letter, not to my parents, but to myself, really, a kind of thesis statement I drafted and redrafted maybe 11 times, trying to strip every trace of accusation out of it and leave only fact. The final version read, in part, "This is not a document about anger. It's a document about what actually happened, because for 15 years, what actually happened and what our family says happened have not matched, and I don't think that gap can close on its own. I love this family. I am not trying to end anything. I am trying to stop pretending." I want to tell you something honestly here. Writing that letter, more than the spreadsheet, more than the trust documents, was the hardest part of the entire process. Numbers don't lie, but they also don't cost anything emotionally to write down. That one paragraph cost me 2 sleepless nights, and I'll admit, one entire bottle of wine shared with Renee over a phone call where I finally told her everything I'd found, the trust, the voicemail, all of it. Renee was quiet for a long time on the phone after I told her about the trust withdrawals. Finally, she said, in a small voice, the $22,000 for the lake house. Some of that was Lily and Owen's college money. Some of it, 6,000 of it specifically, based on the timing. Dana, I didn't know that. I swear to you I didn't know where the money actually came from. I just knew Mom and Dad said they could help. I believe you, I said, and I did. But Renee, I need to ask you something important, and I need the actual truth, not the version that's easiest to tell me. Did you tell Mom it was probably easier if I wasn't at Thanksgiving? The silence went on long enough that I had my answer before she spoke. She called me and said you and Dad had this ongoing tension and asked if I thought it'd be less stressful without it this year. I said, Renee's voice cracked. I said maybe, Dana. I said maybe. I didn't fight for you. I've never really fought for you, have I? You've always just been the one who's fine, who doesn't need anyone to fight for her. I need someone to fight for me, I said, quietly into the phone, in the kitchen, with the lights off except the one over the stove. I've just never known how to ask, because I didn't think anyone would. Renee cried on the phone for a while. I let her. When she'd calmed down, she said something that surprised me, the first genuinely surprising thing anyone in my birth family had said to me in this entire saga. I want to be there when you tell them, she said, not to defend them, to finally be on your side out loud where they can see it. That offer changed the shape of what came next. Choosing the table. I thought carefully about where and when to actually lay everything out, and I want to walk you through that decision, because I think it matters as much as the content itself. I considered a family therapy session, but Dr. Ackhaffer gently pointed out that my parents had never once, in 41 years, expressed any openness to therapy of any kind, and forcing the setting might just give them a reason to dismiss everything as some counselor talking her into this. I considered a letter sent by mail, calm and complete, giving them time and privacy to absorb it without an audience. I nearly went that route. In the end, I chose something more direct, and I chose it for a specific reason. I wanted my parents to answer, in real time, in front of at least one other witness who loved them and loved me, rather than being able to quietly compose a defense over days before ever responding. Not to trap them. To finally require the kind of honesty that only happens when there isn't time to rehearse. I asked my parents to come to my house, not Whitcomb Street, not neutral ground, but my own kitchen table, the one place in this entire story that had never hosted a single dollar of undocumented family bailout, for what I described honestly in a text. I need to talk to you both about something important, not a fight. I'd like Renee there too, if that's all right. Sunday afternoon, if you're free. My mother responded within an hour, of course, is everything okay? I didn't lie to her. Everything's going to be okay. But there are some things I need to say clearly, finally, and I wanted to do it somewhere calm. She sent back a single word, okay, and I remember looking at that word for a long time, wondering whether some part of her already suspected what was coming, or whether it would land, that Sunday, as a complete surprise. I think, honestly, it was somewhere in between. Preparation. The week before that Sunday, I did a handful of quietly important things that I want to name specifically, because I think they matter for anyone listening who's ever considered doing something similar. I moved a small emergency fund, $8,000, modest but real, into an account only Marcus and I could access, not because I expected retaliation exactly, but because Sandra had advised, sensibly, whenever you're about to have a hard, honest conversation with people who control shared financial history, it's wise to make sure your own footing is completely separate first. I didn't do this out of fear. I did it out of the same instinct that made me build the spreadsheet in the first place. Don't leave anything important undocumented or unprotected. I updated our will with Marcus, adding a specific, clear provision naming an independent, professionally managed 529 account for Owen and Lily's education, funded modestly by us directly, explicitly separate from any future family gifts or trusts. It felt, doing that paperwork, less like an act of distrust and more like an act of quiet repair, rebuilding, brick by brick, the exact thing that had been quietly hollowed out. I also called Aunt Pam again, not to ask her to attend, but simply to tell her what I planned to do, because she'd trusted me with something true and I wanted to return that trust before I used it. I'm going to mention that Mom borrowed money from you and said I didn't need the same help, I told her. I wanted you to hear that from me before you heard it secondhand. Use it, Aunt Pam said, without hesitation. Somebody in this family should finally say the quiet part out loud. I'm glad it's you. You always were the one who could say hard things without losing yourself. I didn't feel, in that moment, like someone who could say hard things without losing herself. I felt like someone about to walk into a room holding 15 years of quiet grief in a manila folder. But I appreciated the vote of confidence, and I held on to it. Sunday, the kitchen table. They arrived at 2 in the afternoon, my father in his usual flannel, looking older than I'd registered in a while, my mother in a coat she straightened twice on the way to the door, the way she does when she's nervous and trying not to show it. Renee arrived 10 minutes later, alone. Todd had offered to watch the kids, which I appreciated more than I said. I'd made coffee. Marcus took Owen and Lily to the park, giving us the house. I'd set the folder on the table, closed, unremarkable, next to the coffee cups, and for the first 10 minutes we simply sat and made the kind of small talk families make when everyone in the room senses that the real subject hasn't started yet. The weather, a delayed flight Renee had heard about, Owen's upcoming school play. Eventually my mother said, carefully, "So, what did you want to talk about, honey?" I want to describe, as precisely as I can, how I actually felt in that moment, because I think it's the part people are most curious about. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel nervous in the way you feel before a job interview. I felt, mostly very still, the specific stillness of someone who has rehearsed a difficult thing so many times in her head that the actual moment arrives almost gently, like stepping into water you've already tested with your hand. I want to tell you both something, I said, and I need you to let me finish before either of you responds. It's going to take a little while. Is that okay? My father nodded. My mother said, of course, in a voice that had gone slightly thin. I opened the folder. I started with the spreadsheet not accusingly. I read it almost like a report, which in a sense it was. Kevin's car, 2009. Renee's wedding, 2012. The $9,000 personal loan I'd co-signed and paid off alone, 2015 through 2019. The hip surgery copays, 2019. Kevin's repeated smaller loans through the group chat, none of them repaid. The total, $61,340, documented, dated, sourced. My mother's face had gone pale by the time I reached the total. Dana, I didn't realize it added up to, we never meant for it to be some kind of. I know you didn't add it up, I said calmly. That's actually part of what I want to talk about. Nobody added it up. Nobody wrote any of it down, ever, in 15 years, and I think that's not an accident. I think if any of us had ever written it down, we'd have had to have a very different conversation a long time ago. My father hadn't said anything yet. He was looking at the printed spreadsheet, his jaw tight. I moved to the trust. I told them plainly what the balance should have been, roughly $46,000 with growth, versus what it actually held, $11,200. I laid out the 9 withdrawals, the dates, the amounts, and the one memo line, "Our Lake Property Assist," that connected directly to money Renee herself had confirmed to me. My father finally spoke, and his voice was quieter than I expected, almost unrecognizable from the confident, HVAC repair, weather warning texting man I'd known my whole life. "I always meant to put it back," he said. "Every single time. I told myself next good year I'll put it back." "I believe you," I said, "and I did. This is important, and I want you to understand it, because I think it's what separates this story from a simple villain narrative. I don't think my father is a bad man. I think he's a man who, faced with his children's repeated crises and his own dwindling options, made a series of small, individually understandable decisions that added up, over 11 years, to something none of us would have called acceptable if we'd seen the whole shape of it at once. That's not an excuse. It's an explanation. Both things can be true." Then I played the voicemail. I want to describe the room in that moment specifically. My mother's hand went to her mouth halfway through. My father closed his eyes. Renee, sitting beside me, reached over and took my hand under the table and held it there for the rest of the recording. When it ended, nobody spoke for what felt like a very long time, though it was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. "She doesn't exactly need the family the way the rest of us do," my mother finally repeated, in a whisper, hearing her own words played back to her, apparently for the first time actually hearing what they meant rather than simply what she'd intended them to mean. "Dana, I didn't mean it like, I meant you were strong. I meant you were capable." "I know that's what you meant," I said, "and here is the line, the one I told you at the very beginning of this story that I still think about." I said it quietly, without any heat in my voice at all, because by that point I didn't need heat. The facts had already done the work heat usually tries and fails to do. But being capable isn't the same as not needing anyone. You've spent 15 years treating my strength like it meant I didn't need to be loved the same way Kevin and Renee needed to be loved. And I let you because I didn't know how to ask for something I'd never been offered. I'm not here because I want the money back. I'm here because I want you to understand that the version of me you've been uninviting from things, the tense one, the one who doesn't need help, isn't real. She's a story you told yourselves so you wouldn't have to notice what you were spending and who was paying for it. My mother was crying by then, quietly, the way she cries. She's never been loud about anything, not even her own grief. My father sat very still, staring at his hands. "What do you want us to do?" he said finally, not defensively, genuinely asking. "I don't know yet if there's anything you can do that fixes 15 years, I said. "I'm not asking you to pay me back. I've let go of the money. What I'm asking for is smaller and harder. I'm asking that going forward, if you ever again decide something about this family, who's invited, who's not, who needs help and who doesn't, you actually ask me, instead of deciding on my behalf what I can absorb. And I'm asking that the trust, going forward, gets an actual annual accounting sent to me, since it's my children's names on it too." Renee spoke for the first time since sitting down. "I want to say something too." Her voice was unsteady but clear. "Mom, Dad, I told you it was probably easier without Dana at Thanksgiving. I said that. I've spent every day since regretting it, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't say it just because it's uncomfortable to hear out loud right now. Dana's right. We've all let her be the strong one, so we didn't have to be honest about how much we needed her to keep being it." My father looked up at that, and something in his face shifted, not resolved, not fixed, but genuinely moved, in the way people are moved when they finally see a shape they'd been avoiding looking at directly. "I'm sorry," he said to me, plainly, without qualification, without an excuse attached to the end of the sentence. "I'm sorry about the trust. I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. I don't have a good reason for either one. I got scared, watching Kevin and Renee struggle, and I think somewhere along the way I decided your strength meant I didn't have to be scared for you too. That was wrong. I'm sorry." My mother didn't apologize that day, not fully, not in the clean way my father did. She said, through tears, "I never meant to hurt you, Dana. I really didn't," which is a true sentence and also not quite the same as an apology, and I noticed the difference even as I let it sit, unpushed, because Sandra and Dr. Achafer had both, in their own ways, told me the same thing. You can lay the truth on the table clearly and completely, but you cannot force someone else's heart to catch up to it on your timeline. Some people need weeks. Some people need years. Some people, honestly, never quite arrive. I didn't yell that day. Nobody did in the end, not even close. It was, strangely, one of the calmest and most devastating conversations I've ever had in my life, and I remember thinking, driving Renee home afterward, that calm and devastating aren't opposites at all. Sometimes calm is just what devastating looks like when it's finally being told the truth instead of being shouted down. What happened after? I want to give you the real, unglamorous aftermath, because I think it's more useful than a tidy bow. My father called me 2 weeks later and told me he'd spoken with a financial advisor about restructuring the trust, putting the remaining $11,200 into a properly managed account with automatic statements sent annually to every named beneficiary's parent, meaning me and eventually Renee and Kevin's own children if they had them. It wasn't repayment. It was, at least, transparency going forward, which was closer to what I'd actually asked for than money would have been. He also started, unprompted, sending me occasional texts that had nothing to do with money or crises, a photo of a bird at the feeder, a question about how Owen's school play had gone. Small things, I don't want to oversell them, but I noticed them and I let myself feel glad about them without needing them to mean more than they were. My mother took longer and in some ways is still taking longer. For the first several months, our conversations were shorter, more careful, missing some of the easy warmth we'd never really had much of to begin with, if I'm honest. She did eventually, about 4 months later, on a phone call I wasn't expecting, say something close to the apology I hadn't gotten at the kitchen table. I've been thinking about that voicemail. I think I told myself a story about you being fine so I wouldn't have to feel bad about not checking on you. I'm sorry, Dana. I don't know how to undo 15 years of it, but I see it now, at least. I didn't before. I told her that was enough for now. I meant it mostly. Some days I mean it more than others, and I've made peace with that inconsistency being a normal, human part of forgiveness rather than a failure of it. Kevin and Renee, oddly, both leaned into something more honest afterward. Kevin paid me back, in full, the $600 he'd owed since that January group chat message, not because I asked, but because, he told me, I couldn't keep pretending the group chat thing was normal after hearing you read that whole spreadsheet out loud. It wasn't normal. I'm sorry it took me 40 years to notice. He also, 6 months later, landed a stable warehouse management job, and while I won't pretend one hard conversation single-handedly fixed a decade of instability, I do think something about watching me finally name the pattern gave him permission to look at his own part in it more honestly than he had before. Renee and Todd sold the lake house 18 months later, a decision Renee described to me as the first purely financial decision, Todd, and I have made without asking anyone else's permission first, and it felt terrifying and amazing. They used part of the proceeds to pay off the mortgage arrears, and part to start, finally, an actual emergency fund of their own. Renee and I talk more now than we ever did growing up, mostly because, I think, she finally stopped needing to protect a version of our family that required both of us to stay quiet. The Whitfield fam group chat still exists. It's quieter now, in a better way, less urgent SOS messages, more birthday photos and bad jokes about the raccoon, who apparently still visits the back porch. Nobody's ever formally apologized to the whole chat for Thanksgiving. Nobody's ever needed to. Everyone who was in that kitchen that Sunday knows exactly what happened, and that knowledge, quiet and unspoken as it mostly stays, has done more to change how we all treat each other than any group apology could have. 3 years later. It's been 3 years now since that Sunday at my kitchen table. I still work in finance. Marcus and I renovated that second bathroom we'd been talking about back when this all started, which feels, in a small and slightly funny way, like a fitting monument to the whole ordeal. We finally built something with money that belonged only to us, spent on nothing but our own home. Last Thanksgiving, we hosted. All of us at my table this time, my parents, Kevin and Brittany. They're engaged now, Renee and Todd, Marcus's parents too, because by now our two families have simply folded into one larger, slightly chaotic, mostly honest gathering. My mother brought a green bean casserole and, unprompted, pulled me aside in the kitchen while I was checking the turkey. "I just want to say," she said, a little awkwardly in the way she still sometimes is with tenderness, "thank you for having us. I know that's not something I ever said to you enough. Having you, not just using you." It wasn't a perfect sentence. It didn't undo 15 years. But it was true, and it was hers, freely given, and I've learned to let true things be enough, even when they arrive years later than they should have. I think about the voicemail sometimes, still. She doesn't exactly need the family the way the rest of us do, and I think about how wrong and how understandable that sentence was, both at once. I did need my family. I needed them the whole time. I just needed something different from what Kevin and Renee needed, and nobody had ever thought to ask what that was, because I'd made myself so reliably fine that asking seemed unnecessary. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, the line I want to leave you with, almost exactly as I said it that Sunday at my kitchen table. Being capable isn't the same as not needing anyone. If there's one sentence from this whole story I'd want someone else, sitting in their own car in their own parking garage, staring at their own unbearable text message, to hear, it's that one. Your strength was never supposed to be the reason you got left off the list. It was supposed to be the reason people trusted you enough to finally tell you the truth. If they never figure that out on their own, sometimes you have to be the one who lays it on the table, calmly, with the facts in hand, and lets the silence afterward do the rest of the work. A note before you go. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If any part of this felt familiar, if you've ever been the reliable one, the one nobody worried about because you never gave them a reason to, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me your version of the parking garage, the text message, the voicemail. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more true stories about family, money, and the long, quiet process of finally being seen. I'll see you in the next one.